Um, well, let's just get right into it. My name is Coach Sullenger. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm actually addressing you from my farm, which is just on the French border with Geneva. It's a 30-hectare farm. I just came in, and we're going to talk a little bit about food and recent work I did on the subject, where I'm basically pushing for an urgent change to our food system. And so what I'd like to do is take a few steps back and look at what one famous voice of the past, a rather pessimistic one, that's Thomas Robert Malthus, who lived 200 years ago, had to say about the topic, and use that as sort of a backbone to look at what we're doing today and look at what we've created as a food system, and what the implications of that have been, and then to address, to look at some of the solutions that we have to create a more harmonious, more regenerative, beneficial, healthy, dynamic food system, which I think is what's urgently needed. I'm sharing a screen, so I hope everyone can see it. So in a recent article which I shared with the group and in the media, I'm talking about what today I would characterize as a hunger game dynamic, where unhealthy food is basically leading to booming and record levels of chronic diseases, ranging from cardiovascular diseases to fatty liver, to diabetes, and a whole host of others, including also endocrinial diseases that probably 30 or 40, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, probably almost nobody even had heard of. And so that is, in my mind, the real pandemic that we have today. And I think that very much the COVID situation has brought this issue back to light, and that's why I'd like to address it today. In 2009, I produced a documentary film called Last Malthus. That's why I'm bringing Malthus back. And just if you bear with me to listen to a couple of things that Malthus had to say back at that time.
But I am also a demographer, and being a demographer, I deal in numbers. I have developed a theory concerning how our planet works.
I think the international community is now experiencing a triple crisis.
This is not a new crisis. It has worsened. So today we almost have 1 billion people who are going hungry to bed each night.
Yeah, so Malthus 200 years ago, when the population on the planet was not even 1 billion, was saying that there are limitations, and scarce resources would be essentially used up, and Malthusian checks, as we now call them, those are checks on population, were things like pandemics, war, pestilence, plague, and that would just keep coming back to basically trim the population on the planet. And so today we're at 7.8 billion. Obviously something else happened that Malthus hadn't expected, and that's technology and innovation. And so I'm just going to breeze through this, but as because a lot of these things these issues or topics are probably very well understood. But we've created this massive industrial monoculture scale agriculture, which is not without its impacts. And here you have this. I think it's interesting to look at the population growth on charts like this, because it brings things into perspective. In such a very, very short time, how the population has exploded, but yet, we've managed to more or less feed that population, albeit food continues to be poorly distributed and there's a lot of waste. But today, with the COVID-19 crisis, there is talk among the international organizations that we could once again face, because of bottlenecks and problems with supply chains, we could face another issue similar to what we had in 2009, when prices shot up for agricultural goods, and we could see something like 150 or 200 million people going back into malnourishment. And so this is also a major issue to deal with. So what we have today is a agricultural food chain and food chain, which is heavily dominated by monopolistic and large enterprises. And I think that the message I want to say here is that consumers are not really in direct touch with farmers. Consumer demand is filtered through any number of other let's say, steps in this process. And I think that this is one of the things that digitalization stands to change. Companies like Indigo are coming out with, I would say, relatively decentralized marketplaces, which now allow consumers to start being choosy about selecting more healthy, more sustainable, non-GMO, you have it, products. And the farmers can actually avoid these big trading companies and go take those products straight more directly to the consumer. And so this is a little bit what I was talking about, the history of this poor food. And I think what's very disturbing from my point, and what I highlighted in my recent article, was that despite the knowledge that we have today, things like high fructose corn syrup and excessive amounts of sweeteners and sugar, and salt and fats and unhealthy ingredients continue to be present in a major part of our foods, particularly all these industrial foods. And I think that the entrenched lobbies, either the corn lobby or the sugar lobby, corn obviously is behind high fructose corn syrup, which is something which is not very well known in Europe, but which health experts attribute to fatty liver and other chronic diseases. And these interest groups and these lobbies continue to publish self-generated science, which speaks in favor of those products. And I think this is a major issue. Fortunately, we do start to see sugar taxes and things like this coming around to start in an effort to have these producers pay the price for some of those unhealthy products, which are leading to the chronic diseases. I just thought I'd throw this in to show you also the growth in plastic, a large part of which, I think it's about 40–50%, is related to packaging. So not only we're consuming unhealthy foods, which is based on a non-regenerative monoculture, which is basically, many argue today, a mass extinction. We've seen, I think, in the last 100 years or so, almost 60% of species basically go extinct. And we're talking about, we're not necessarily talking about small rodents. We're talking about all kinds of bacterias and things like that, which are beneficial for the soil. Not to mention that we have pumped enormous amounts of carbon dioxide and methane and other gases because of our industrial activity and also because of agriculture into the atmosphere, while at the same time, regenerative agriculture actually offers the opportunity to sequester and capture that those nutrients, those vital nutrients for plant growth back into the soil. And that's one of the key, would say, interest in the subject of regenerative agriculture as a solution to the greenhouse issue, to the climate change issue, and to pollution in general. We don't have a lot of time, but I'd like to say that when we talk about regenerative agriculture, what is that? Well, it's a lot of things. It's first and foremost eliminating practices which are polluting. That means deep tilling and basically feedlotting and things like that are known to be polluting activities. It's also choice of crop rotation and the choice of crops. It's also a question of what types of crops we're growing. But some practices which are regenerative in nature include cover cropping, because when you don't cover the soil, basically those carbon dioxide and things are released into the atmosphere. And other practices are the use, are the growing of things called pulse crops, which are lentils and different types of high protein peas and things like that. These are crops which basically fix nitrogen and fix other nutrients to the soil. So some crops actually have the capacity to sequester significant amounts of CO2, which actually can help to bring the ecology back into an equilibrium. So a couple more comments, and then I'd like to maybe open up just for some discussion. But I think what today I find very encouraging is that there is indeed the beginning of what I see as a real food revolution, which is centered around health, consciousness for the environment. It's becoming very trendy now to be clean and green. Of course, this is the case in demographics where people have higher education and higher disposable income. This is not something that is necessarily generalized in emerging countries where people, unfortunately, still consume a lot more industrial and fast food because it's simply cheaper, believe it or not. It's a lot cheaper in many cases than consuming raw or less processed or healthy food. I mean, there are many places where, you know, a bottle of soda is actually cheaper than a bottle of water. And I think that's a major issue that, you know, that should be corrected one way or another. And so the media, with the release of films like The Game Changers and some other documentaries, I think is actually carrying this message very well, and is really driving this the changes in consumer behavior that we're seeing. So in places like Europe, you know, we see less meat consumption, and whereas in places in emerging countries, you know, they're still very much looking at the Western style of consumption, and we see this wealth effect where as those inhabitants of those emerging regions incrementally earn a little bit more money, they immediately spend it on a richer diet, and so they tend to be consuming more meat. But I think that there's, and this is a whole other chapter of a discussion, but I think that the question of plant-based protein and plant-based meat is more important than ever today. First, both as a question of health, but also as a question of the environment, and as well as a question of animal welfare. Those are really the three key drivers, which are turning people into flexitarians and eventually vegetarians. And I think that trend is certainly going to continue. So those are some of the key areas. So one example of that, before I tie up, is we've seen, you know, about, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, in the dairy space, you know, almond milks and milks coming from vegetable sources, rice, wheat, and other, practically didn't have any market share at all, where today it's over that time frame is ramped up to about 12 to 15%, depending on which market. So today we start to see the first vegetable-based hamburgers and meats coming out, and I think we can expect a similar growth pattern in those products as well. So we're going to start seeing plant-based food penetrating into the, you know, into the traditional meat space, and we can expect, where I think today plant-based probably is less than $1 billion of revenue. If it gets up to 10% in the next 10 years of the market, you know, we're talking, I think, about 10 or 15 billion dollars. So this could be quite significant. Everyone's probably been watching companies like Beyond Meat that have hit the market. And so the industry itself, I think we're really in an environment where, you know, as I showed earlier, you know, we've got this very concentrated industry structure, but today there's a big movement among small, innovative companies coming out with new products, coming out with healthy products. And I think that the consumer pull is such that the larger companies certainly need to find solutions. They cannot continue to try to defend unhealthy products with the consumer awareness where it is today, where people actually start understanding those issues. You know, there's all kinds of technology today where somebody goes to the supermarket, you can scan the products with any number of applications, including Yuka, immediately see, you know, the health report card of that product. And so the consumer, I think, has an opportunity to have a very objective report on just about any consumer products today. So with that, I'd like to open up to any questions and discussion. Those are just some key points from recent work on the subject, and if anyone's interested in delving into that further, I'm happy to share with you an article which I've just written about this question of basically I talked about, you know, how Malthus 200 years ago was calling for these pandemics and linking that to this Hunger Game situation that we have today, this Hunger Game dynamic, where big companies produce unhealthy food, big pharma companies are making huge windfalls on basically selling chronic disease, you know, drugs to people that get those chronic diseases because of lifestyle issues, but also because of poor diet. And this is killing our healthcare system. This is bankrupting the healthcare system. And it's also, I think, arguably weakening health in a general way, to where today, I think many people simply have compromised immune systems and compromised health. And probably the best proof of that is looking at the obesity rates, which are around 2 billion on this planet are actually obese. At the same time that we have, you know, probably 700 million or so which are still malnourished. It's a crazy paradox, isn't it? In our modern time, we have such problems lingering, and I think that today, you know, the food system, to change the food system to turn to regenerative, healthy food is really, I think, in my mind, one of the greatest solutions that we have. Thanks. So I invite anyone to any questions. What I wanted to say is that I'll be moderating a webinar on plant-based meat, actually, on the 6th of May, which you're all welcome to join at 11 o'clock European time. And also, as I mentioned, I'm happy to share that recent article with anyone who might have an interest.
That was great, the Coast. Really appreciate it. It's Eugene here from Frankfurt. I just have a question. I'm Dutch, actually. I'm Germany now, but and in Holland, the farmers are protesting in a grand scale, right? Follow that, specifically animal farmers. Obviously, they don't want to change, yet they have the biggest carbon footprint, pretty much. How do you see that? How do you look at that? I mean, the only way to have a change is the consumer behavior change. If people don't buy meat anymore, or less, or better quality and less frequency, or how do you see that more that culture change around it that is needed in order to bring that shift, really? What is your view on that, Carl?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. I think this is one of the most challenging issues that we have, is because farming is a massive industry globally, and in some economies, it's also a very significant part of the economy. Holland, I understand the agricultural industry is quite important. And so, you know, how to deal with this shift. At the same time, you know, in Europe and in other countries as well, I mean, we have a huge state support, you know, for the agricultural sector. You've got the common agricultural policy in Europe, which is, you know, pumping billions and billions every year, you know, to support agriculture production, which is unprofitable. And so, you know, how do you basically, you know, preserve a certain segment of the population that's still linked to that industry and help transition them? You know, at the same time, we've got these trends that I've been talking about, and another trend which I didn't mention which is going to be, I think, an important one. And that was illustrated by a report which came out and really shook up the protein industry recently by a group called Rethink X, that claimed that in the next 10 years, precision fermentation, which is driven also by molecular biology innovation and AI, is going to basically allow the industry to produce proteins which in all aspects are superior to animal meat, both including in taste and aspect in health, etc. So we face also this big disruptive threat coming from lab fermented or modern let's say lab-based meat. I don't have the answer for how this transition can happen, but what I can tell you is that, sitting on a farm, I mean, you've got a whole host of opportunities and choices, about what you can grow, about what you can produce. And, animal farming is just one of those. And there's many other things that, that you can do. And there is a growing, obviously demand for high value added organic products or other specialty crops, et cetera. So I think overall, it's not going to be easy for producers. Producers have always gotten the short end of the stick, and I think I don't really see that that's going to change significantly, unfortunately, given the kind of industry structure that we have now. The one encouraging thing you see where I think industry farmers and food producers will gain is that back to what I was showing earlier, talking about this structure, is that the consumers more and more, they want to go directly to producers. They want to go directly to producers, and they want to bypass some of these input and trading companies, which take most of the economic rents. And I think now that has been enabled by the digital platforms, which are now emerging. And I think that's very encouraging, and that's going to give more margin to the farmers themselves.
Great, very impressive. Well, you're down the road from Nestle.
Yeah, I am. Nestle is, it's Nestle. Obviously, Nestle is an interesting story. I mean, Nestle has been the most successful, company on the stock market. That's for sure. I think the stock is very close to where it was prior to the prior to the virus outbreak. In fact, but trading at very high multiples. But what I would say about companies like Nestle is they are taking actions to embrace let's say some clean and green strategies, but it still remains quite marginal if you look at what that represents in terms of the overall revenues of a company like that. To really redirect such a massive company, it's like trying to steer the Titanic. I mean, it's and I hear that directly from people within the company. I know people, key professionals within companies like that have left to do startups, very innovative startups, some in protein and algae and any number of different things, because they're very frustrated with the very slow, let's say, the slow pace of change in companies like that, which is unfortunate, because I think we need more leadership from the big companies. More focus on producing sustainable and healthy products.
Well, I couldn't have had a better introduction to my session on Next Coast about leadership and culture and behavior. So thank you. Yeah, really great.
Great, looking forward. I'll stick around for that one. Thank you. Yeah, so today, maybe just to tie up, I mean, we kind of at the end of that short presentation, we talked a little bit about the industry. Yeah, I think the protein is the key, really, isn't it? Because population grows at a certain rate. food production grows at a similar rate, but protein growth is growing at double that rate. Actually, protein demand is growing at double that rate because of the wealth effect, where people on low demographic in low demographic categories, when they earn more money, they immediately spend it on a richer diet. So that's why protein continues to grow, and we really have to think about where we're going to get our protein in the future. I think we've really pushed the limits on protein from traditional animal sources. That's for sure. I mean, most farmland, more than 50% is used for grazing. 1 kilo of beef, there's 8 to 10 underlying inputs of grain. We are polluting both the ground and the atmosphere with methane and other nasty things coming from those animals. So I think that we really have to think about other sources of protein, and those other sources are actually experiencing very high growth rates. And this is the opportunity for those companies like Nestle and others. Danone is basically to capture that. So that's where I think, we need to stop them. We need to stop those toxic lobby groups, from sugar and high fructose and corn and others. And we need to encourage those growth areas coming from talking about new protein sources, healthy protein sources. So I think with that, we're right on time.
Yeah. So I don't know how I do that. You stop sharing and I start sharing, I presume.
Yeah, I'm just shutting my, there you go. Screen sharing.